Queen performed a secret concert that night with only 50 people in the audience, and every single one of them was homeless. But what happened at the end of that concert would become one of the most touching moments in music history. Picture this. It's December 23, 1985. Just months after Live Aid changed the world, and Freddie Mercury is standing backstage at a small community center in East London, nervously adjusting his mustache. But this wasn't nerves about performing. This was something entirely different. Something that would challenge everything he thought he knew about music, fame, and human connection. Have you ever wondered what it would feel like to perform for people who had absolutely nothing to lose? People who couldn't buy your albums, couldn't afford concert tickets, couldn't even afford a roof over their heads? That's exactly what Freddie was about to discover, and what he found that night would haunt him in the most beautiful way possible. The idea had come from an unexpected source. 3 weeks earlier, Freddie had been leaving his favorite restaurant in Kensington when he noticed a young homeless man playing guitar on the street corner. The man was playing Bohemian Rhapsody, but he was playing it wrong, missing half the chords, forgetting the lyrics. Instead of walking past like everyone else, Freddie stopped. What happened next surprised even him. "That's not quite right, mate," Freddie said gently, crouching down beside the guitarist. The young man, probably in his early 20s, looked up with a mixture of embarrassment and defiance. "I know it's not perfect," he replied, "but it's the only song that makes me feel like I'm still human." Those words hit Freddie like a physical blow. Here was someone who had lost everything. Yet music was still keeping him alive. But wait, there's something even more incredible about this story that I haven't told you yet. The young man's name was David, and he had been a music student at the Royal Academy before his life fell apart. His parents had disowned him when he came out as gay. His scholarship was revoked due to financial problems, and within 6 months, he had gone from studying classical composition to sleeping in doorways. But he still carried his guitar everywhere, and he still played Queen songs, because, as he told Freddie, "Your music reminds me that it's okay to be different." Freddie sat down on the cold pavement beside David, ignoring the stares of passers-by who couldn't believe what they were seeing. "Play it again," Freddie said. "But this time, play it your way. Don't worry about getting it right, just make it yours." What David played next wasn't technically perfect, but it was raw, honest, and filled with a pain that no music school could teach. When he finished, Freddie was quiet for a long moment. Then he did something that would change both their lives forever. He asked David a question that seemed impossible. "How would you like to hear Queen play a private concert?" David laughed bitterly. "Right, and I suppose you're Freddie Mercury." But when Freddie smiled and said, "Actually, yes, I am," David's world stopped spinning. But here's where the story gets really incredible, and trust me, you're not going to believe what Freddie did next. Instead of just inviting David to a regular Queen concert, Freddie had a completely different idea. He wanted to bring music directly to people like David, people who society had forgotten, people who needed to remember they were still human. That night, he called an emergency meeting with the rest of Queen. "I want to do something," Freddie told Roger, Brian, and John. "Something different, something real." When he explained his idea, the room went silent. He wanted Queen to perform at homeless shelters, soup kitchens, anywhere they could find people who had been forgotten by the world. Roger Taylor was the first to speak. "Freddie, we just performed for 72,000 people at Wembley. Now you want us to play for 50 homeless people in a community center." But something in Freddie's eyes told them this wasn't a whim. This was important, more important than anything they'd done before. Brian May later said that he'd never seen Freddie so passionate about anything. He wasn't talking about charity or publicity, Brian remembered. He was talking about connection, about remembering why we started making music in the first place. The logistics were nightmare. How do you secretly move Queen's equipment? How do you organize a concert for people who don't have addresses or phone numbers? How do you keep it secret from the media? But Freddie was determined, and when Freddie Mercury was determined, impossible things became possible. They started small. The first secret concert was at St. Martin's Shelter in Camden on that cold December night. Word had spread quietly through the homeless community, not that Queen was coming, just that there would be music and hot food. Most people came for the food. Picture the scene: a dingy community center with fluorescent lights, folding chairs arranged in uneven rows, the smell of instant coffee and second-hand clothes hanging in the air. This was about as far from Wembley Stadium as you could get. And there, setting up their equipment like they were preparing for the concert of their lives, was Queen. The audience was unlike anything they'd ever seen. Men and women of all ages, some clearly mentally ill, others just down on their luck. Some were drunk, others were clean but hollow-eyed with despair. Many were suspicious, wondering what the catch was. Free concerts didn't happen to people like them. When Freddie walked onto that makeshift stage, something magical happened. The room didn't erupt in screams like usual. Instead, there was a stunned silence. These people knew who Queen was, but they couldn't believe what they were seeing. "Good evening," Freddie said, his voice gentler than anyone had ever heard it. "We're Queen, and we're here because music belongs to everyone, not just people who can afford concert tickets. Everyone. But here's the moment that changed everything, and I promise you what happened next will give you chills." They opened with "We Will Rock You." But it sounded different in that small space. Without thousands of voices singing along, you could hear the vulnerability in Freddie's voice, the raw power of Brian's guitar, the thunderous precision of Roger's drums, the subtle complexity of John's bass. It was Queen stripped down to their essence. But the audience wasn't responding the way they expected. These weren't screaming fans, these were people who had forgotten how to hope. They sat quietly, some with tears in their eyes, others staring at the floor. It was beautiful and heartbreaking at the same time. Halfway through Somebody to Love, something incredible happened. A woman in the front row, probably in her 50s with graying hair and worn clothes, began to sing along quietly. Her voice was thin and shaky, but she knew every word. Gradually, others joined in, not with the wild enthusiasm of a stadium crowd, but with something deeper, something desperate. "Can anybody find me somebody to love?" they sang, and suddenly those lyrics meant something completely different. These weren't just words anymore. They were prayers. Freddie noticed the change. He walked closer to the audience, kneeling at the edge of the stage, so he was at eye level with the people in the front row. "Sing it like you mean it," he said. "Because tonight, you're not alone." What happened next became the stuff of legend among those who were there. The woman who had been singing started to cry. Not the happy tears of a fan meeting their idol, but the deep, body-shaking sobs of someone who had been holding in pain for too long. Freddie stopped singing and walked into the audience. He knelt beside her chair and gently asked, "What's your name?" "Margaret," she whispered. "I haven't heard music in so long. I forgot how much I needed it." Margaret's story was heartbreaking. She had been a piano teacher for 30 years before Alzheimer's took her husband and financial problems took her home. She'd been living in shelters for 8 months, and she hadn't touched a piano since the day they repossessed hers. "Would you like to play something with us?" Freddie asked. The community center had an old, out-of-tune upright piano in the corner. Without hesitation, Freddie walked over and began playing the opening chords to "Love of My Life." "Margaret," he called out, "would you help me with this?" With shaking hands, Margaret approached the piano. What happened next was pure magic. She began to play along, her muscle memory taking over despite months away from the keys. Her playing was hesitant at first, then stronger. Freddie sang the melody while Margaret provided a counterpoint that was both technically beautiful and emotionally devastating. The entire room was transfixed. Here was a homeless woman playing piano with Freddie Mercury, and it was the most honest music anyone had ever heard. But the story gets even more incredible. Because what none of them knew was that Margaret wasn't just any piano teacher. She had been David's instructor at the Royal Academy before everything fell apart for both of them. When David realized who was playing, he approached the piano with his guitar. 3 lost souls, brought together by circumstance and music, creating something beautiful in the most unlikely place imaginable. The rest of Queen joined in, creating an impromptu arrangement that was both haunting and hopeful. When the song ended, there wasn't a dry eye in the room, including the band members themselves. Roger Taylor later said it was the most powerful musical moment of his entire career. "We'd played for millions of people, but that night with 50 homeless individuals taught us what music was really for." After that first concert, word spread through London's homeless community, but it spread differently than normal concert news. It wasn't about celebrity sightings or photo opportunities. It was about dignity, respect, and the healing power of music. Queen performed 7 more secret concerts over the next 3 months. Each one was different, but each one was transformative, both for the audiences and for the band. At a women's shelter in Southwark, they met Sarah, a former nurse, who had lost everything after developing a drug addiction following her son's death. When Queen played Who Wants to Live Forever, Sarah broke down completely. Later, she told them that their music had reminded her that she did want to live forever, or at least longer than she had that morning. At a youth hostel in Tower Hamlets, they encountered a group of teenagers who had aged out of the foster care system. These kids were angry, defensive, and suspicious of anyone trying to help them. But when Queen launched into We Are the Champions, something shifted. By the end of the song, tough street kids were crying and hugging each other. But it wasn't just the audiences who were being changed. Each secret concert was changing Queen as well. Freddie started writing new material inspired by these experiences. Songs about dignity, resilience, and the power of human connection. While these songs were never officially recorded, bootleg recordings from the secret concerts reveal a depth and vulnerability in Freddie's voice that was unprecedented. Brian May began incorporating elements from these intimate performances into Queen's stadium shows. The guitar solos became more personal, more conversational. He said later that playing for people who had nothing taught him that music wasn't about showing off technical skill. It was about touching souls. Roger Taylor's drumming evolved too. In those small spaces, his usual thunderous style had to be modified, becoming more nuanced and emotionally responsive. He learned to listen to the audience in a completely new way. Even John Deacon, usually the most reserved member of the band, was visibly moved by these experiences. His bass lines during the secret concerts had a different quality, more melodic and supportive, creating a foundation that held both the music and the emotions together. But perhaps the most significant change was in how they viewed their fame and success. Before those concerts, Freddie said in a rare interview about the experience, "I thought success meant bigger stages, louder crowds, more elaborate costumes. But playing for people who had lost everything taught me that real success is connection. It's making someone feel less alone, even if it's just for one song." The secret concerts had to end eventually. As word spread, maintaining secrecy became impossible. Journalists were starting to ask questions, and some of the shelters were being overwhelmed by people hoping to catch a glimpse of Queen. The final secret concert was held on March 15, 1986, at the same Camden shelter where it all began. David was there, still homeless, but no longer hopeless. Margaret was there too, having found temporary housing and part-time work teaching piano to children. The room was packed with faces that had become familiar over the months. For their final song, Freddie chose Bohemian Rhapsody, but he performed it differently than ever before. Instead of the operatic grandeur of the studio version, he played it simply on piano, with the audience singing the vocal harmonies. It was rough, imperfect, and absolutely beautiful. When the song ended, Freddie stood up from the piano and looked out at the audience. "Thank you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you for reminding us why we make music. Thank you for sharing your stories with us. Thank you for letting us into your lives." Then he said something that no one expected. "We may not be able to do these secret concerts anymore, but that doesn't mean the music stops. Every time you hear a Queen song on the radio, remember that it was made for you, all of you. The forgotten, the lost, the struggling. Music belongs to everyone, and you belong to the music." The impact of those secret concerts extended far beyond the people who attended them. David eventually got back on his feet, partly inspired by his experience with Queen. He never became a professional musician, but he started a program teaching guitar to homeless youth, using music as a tool for healing and hope. Margaret found permanent housing and returned to teaching piano. She often told her students about the night she played with Queen, not as a celebrity story but as an example of how music could find you anywhere, even in your darkest moments. Many of the other people who attended those concerts reported that the experience was a turning point in their lives. Not because meeting Queen solved their problems, but because being treated with dignity and respect reminded them of their own worth. Queen never officially acknowledged the secret concerts during Freddie's lifetime. There were no press releases, no documentary cameras, no charity photo opportunities. The band insisted on keeping the focus on the music and the people, not on their own generosity. However, bootleg recordings of some of the concerts began circulating among Queen fans in the late 1980s. These recordings, while technically imperfect, captured something that studio albums couldn't: the raw emotional power of music as a healing force. After Freddie's death in 1991, the surviving members of Queen finally spoke publicly about the secret concerts. Brian May called them the most important work we ever did, while Roger Taylor said they were Freddie's greatest idea. In 1992, the Mercury Phoenix Trust was established to continue Freddie's work supporting marginalized communities. While the Trust's primary focus was AIDS awareness, it also funded music programs for homeless individuals, directly inspired by those secret concerts. Today, many cities around the world have programs that bring live music to homeless shelters and community centers. Most trace their inspiration back to those 8 secret Queen concerts in London during the winter of 19. The Freddie Mercury Foundation established the Secret Concert Grant in 2015, funding musicians who want to perform for underserved communities without media attention or commercial gain. The only requirement is that the concerts must remain secret, keeping the focus on the music and the people, just as Freddie intended. Margaret passed away in 2003, but her piano students still perform an annual concert in her honor at the same community center where she played with Queen. They always end with "Love of My Life," and there's never a dry eye in the audience. David, now in his 60s, still teaches guitar to homeless youth. His program has helped hundreds of young people find their way through music. He says the most important lesson he learned from Freddie wasn't about playing guitar, it was about dignity. Freddie showed me that being homeless didn't make me less human. David explains, "Music reminded me who I was before everything went wrong, and who I could be again." The secret concerts remain one of the most closely guarded secrets in rock history. No professional footage exists, and the participants were asked not to take photographs. This wasn't about creating content or publicity, it was about creating connection. But perhaps the most powerful legacy of those secret concerts is the reminder they provide about the true purpose of art. In a world obsessed with celebrity culture, streaming numbers, and commercial success, the story of Queen's secret concert stands as a testament to music's real power. It's not about how many people know your name or how much money you make. It's about touching one soul at a time, about reminding people that they're not alone, about creating moments of beauty and connection in an often harsh world. Freddie Mercury could have spent those winter months relaxing in his mansion, counting his money, or planning his next stadium tour. Instead, he chose to sit on the floor of a community center, playing piano with a homeless woman and a street musician, creating magic that most of the world would never see. That's the real measure of an artist's greatness. Not the size of their ego or their bank account, but the size of their heart and their willingness to use their gifts in service of others. The secret concerts of 1985-86 weren't Queen's biggest performances, but they may have been their most important. They remind us that sometimes the most powerful music happens not in front of thousands of screaming fans but in quiet moments of human connection, when artists remember that their greatest responsibility is not to entertain but to heal. And somewhere in London today, there are still people who remember the night Queen played just for them, treating them not as charity cases or photo opportunities, but as human beings worthy of the world's greatest rock band's time and attention. That's a legacy worth more than any number of platinum albums or sold-out stadiums. Because in the end, the secret concerts taught everyone involved the same lesson. Music doesn't belong to the famous or the wealthy. It belongs to anyone who needs to remember that they're not alone, that they matter, and that beauty can find them anywhere, even in their darkest moments. That's the real magic of Queen's secret concerts, and that's why, almost 40 years later, people still whisper about the night rock legends prove that the most powerful stages aren't always the biggest ones. But wait, there's one more story I haven't told you yet, one that will completely change how you think about everything you just heard. In 2019, a documentary crew was interviewing former residents of London homeless shelters for a film about urban poverty. During one interview, an elderly man named Thomas approached the filmmakers with a weathered shoebox. Inside were photographs that no one was supposed to see. Thomas had been a maintenance worker at the Camden shelter in 1985. On the night of Queen's first secret concert, he had been hiding in the back room, too embarrassed about his appearance to join the audience. But he had brought his old Polaroid camera to work that day, hoping to capture some memories of the Christmas decorations. What he captured instead were the only known photographs of Queen's secret concerts. The images are grainy, taken from awkward angles through doorways and windows, but they show something extraordinary. Freddie Mercury sitting on the floor with homeless individuals, Brian May teaching a young man guitar chords, Roger Taylor sharing his drumsticks with children who had never held instruments before. But the most powerful photograph shows the moment Margaret and David played with Freddie. You can see the concentration on Margaret's face as her fingers found the piano keys, the tears streaming down David's cheeks as he played guitar, and Freddie's expression, a mixture of joy and heartbreak that perfectly captured the essence of those magical nights. When these photographs surfaced, the surviving members of Queen faced a difficult decision. For 34 years they had honored Freddie's wish to keep the concerts private. But seeing these images reminded them of something Freddie had said during that final secret concert. Maybe someday, when the world needs to remember what music is really for, people will understand why we did this. The world in 2019 certainly needed that reminder. Social media had reduced music to 15-second clips optimized for viral spread. Streaming algorithms prioritized catchy hooks over emotional depth. The connection between artists and audiences had become increasingly artificial, mediated by screens and marketing campaigns. Brian May made the decision to share Thomas's photographs, along with the story of the secret concerts, during a special interview on the anniversary of Freddie's death. The response was overwhelming. Musicians around the world began organizing their own secret concerts, not for publicity or content creation, but for genuine connection. Homeless shelters reported an unprecedented number of volunteers offering to perform. Music therapy programs received funding from unexpected sources. And somewhere in London, an aging guitar teacher named David watched the news coverage with tears in his eyes, knowing that Freddie's vision was finally reaching the world. The photographs also revealed something else that had been hidden for decades. In several images you can see Freddie wearing a small pin on his jacket. Music historians who examined the photos identified it as a pin from the Terence Higgins Trust, one of the first AIDS awareness organizations in the UK. This detail adds another layer to the story of the secret concerts. Freddie was already dealing with his own health concerns during the winter of 1985-86, though he hadn't yet been diagnosed with AIDS. The knowledge that his own time might be limited may have influenced his decision to prioritize meaningful connection over commercial success. Dr. Sarah Mitchell, who has studied the psychological impact of music on marginalized communities, believes the secret concerts represent a turning point in how we understand the relationship between fame and responsibility. Freddie Mercury was at the height of his fame when he chose to perform for people society had forgotten. Dr. Mitchell explains. He understood that true influence isn't measured by the size of your audience, but by the depth of your impact on individual lives. Those concerts weren't charity. They were an exchange of humanity. The ripple effects of the secret concerts continue to expand. In 2020, during the COVID-19 pandemic, when live music was largely prohibited, musicians began organizing virtual secret concerts for isolated elderly people, homeless individuals staying in hotels, and healthcare workers. The model remained the same: intimate performances focused on connection rather than entertainment. Margaret's great niece, Emma, became a music therapist, partly inspired by her aunt's stories about playing piano with Queen. Emma now works with dementia patients, using music to help them reconnect with memories and emotions. She says her aunt's experience taught her that music has the power to restore dignity to people who feel forgotten by society. Aunt Margaret never got over that night, Emma recalls. Not because she met famous musicians, but because someone famous treated her like she mattered. That's what changed her life, not the music itself, but the respect and recognition of her humanity. The secret concerts also influenced Queen's later work in ways that weren't apparent at the time. Songs like "The Show Must Go On" and "These Are the Days of Our Lives" carry emotional weight that can be traced back to those intimate performances. Freddie's vocals on these tracks have a vulnerability and authenticity that reflects what he learned during those winter months in community centers and shelters. Perhaps most importantly, the secret concerts established a template for how artists can use their platform responsibly. Instead of performative charity or social media activism, they demonstrated the power of genuine personal engagement with communities that need support. Today, the Queen Protocol, as it's sometimes called among music industry professionals, refers to any performance or artistic engagement that prioritizes human connection over publicity. The key elements are secrecy, no media coverage, intimacy, small audiences, and dignity, treating audience members as equals rather than beneficiaries. Major record labels have begun incorporating Queen Protocol events into their artists' contracts, though many attempts fail because they're motivated by marketing rather than genuine desire for connection. The most successful secret concerts happen when artists, like Freddie, are driven by personal experience rather than professional obligation. The story of Queen's secret concerts has also become required reading in many social work and music therapy programs. Students learn about the concerts not as examples of celebrity charity, but as case studies in how art can be used to restore dignity and hope to marginalized communities. But perhaps the most fitting tribute to those secret concerts happened in 2021, on what would have been Freddie's 75th birthday. Without any coordination or central planning, musicians in 17 different countries organized secret concerts in homeless shelters, using only word-of-mouth promotion and following the original Queen protocol guidelines. The concerts weren't advertised, weren't recorded, and weren't publicized afterward. They existed only in the memories of the people who were there, just as Freddie intended. Reports filtered back through social workers and shelter staff. An opera singer in Milan performing Puccini arias in a soup kitchen, a punk rock band in Detroit playing acoustic sets in a youth shelter, a gospel choir in Atlanta singing for elderly homeless individuals in a community center. Each concert was different, but each carried the same message. You matter, you're not alone, and music belongs to everyone. This grassroots movement, inspired by 40-year-old secret concerts, proves that Freddie Mercury's vision was both timeless and prophetic. In an age of increasing social isolation and digital connection, the need for genuine human contact through shared artistic experience has never been greater. The secret concerts of 1985-86 weren't just footnote in Queen's history. They were a blueprint for how artists can use their gifts to heal a fractured world. They remind us that the most powerful performances aren't always the ones that make the most noise, and that sometimes the greatest act of rebellion is simply treating forgotten people with the dignity they deserve. And somewhere tonight, in a community center or shelter you've never heard of, someone is probably playing a Queen song for people society has overlooked, continuing a tradition that started with one homeless guitarist on a London street corner, and a rock star who decided that music was too important to be reserved only for those who could afford it.